Hello, this is John Miares from the USDA NASS Great Lakes Regional Field Office in East Lansing, Michigan. In this presentation, we are going to be talking about the pest management practices questions that are in Section E of the ARMS Phase 2 Production Practices Report. We're going to be looking at Section E in two parts. The first part of Section E is fairly straightforward and includes questions that have been asked on ARMS 2 and chemical use surveys for the past several years. The second part of Section E, now labeled E1, includes questions that are fairly new to the survey and will be discussed in a separate presentation. The purpose of Section E is for us to be able to collect data on pest management practices that growers use on their crops. We will be asking operators about pest management practices either as alternatives to pesticides or practices which improve the effectiveness of pesticides. This section also asks how decisions are made regarding those practices so that responses to invasive species and price shocks can be monitored. The survey asks growers to report on the practices they use to manage pests in the selected field, including weeds, insects, and diseases in 4 specific categories. Prevention practices involve actions taken to keep a pest population from infesting a crop or a field. Avoidance practices use cultural measures to mitigate or eliminate detrimental effects of pests. Monitoring practices observe or detect pests through sampling, counting, or other forms of scouting. Suppression practices involve controlling or reducing existing pest populations to mitigate crop damage. How is this information used? Researchers use the information to analyze the effectiveness and performance of alternative pesticide treatments and potential impacts on the environment and health. Data from these questions are vital to address concerns of food safety, water quality, and pesticide regulation. Integrated pest management is an approach used by farm operators to control pests in an environmentally responsible manner. IPM combines biological, cultural, and chemical methods of pest control. Proper identification of pest problems may reduce pesticide usage. So, let's talk about what constitutes a pest. It is important that we define pests as not just insects. Pests, for our intents and purposes, include weeds, insects, and diseases. We need to make that clear to respondents from the start because in this section, pests will refer to all 3. If we don't introduce pests this broadly for all operators, they may answer the questions with only one kind of pest in mind. Many operations tend to focus on one kind of pest depending upon the crop, but we are concerned with all types of pests. Near the beginning of Section E, we see a screening question, which is listed as an enumerator action. Were pesticide applications reported in Section D? As noted earlier, pesticides could refer to any herbicides, insecticides, or fungicides. Refer back to Section D pesticide application table to identify what was applied. If any chemicals were applied in Section D, you will check yes. If not, you can check no and skip to question 4. For questions 2 through 5, the questions are very similar to what have been asked in the past, but please note for this year, they have changed the format as to how those values should be coded. If the answer is yes, you will put a 1. If the answer is no, you will enter a 3. Questions 6 through 10 focus on why certain pesticides were applied. Proper identification of pest problems may reduce pesticide usage. Some producers may hire professionals to check their fields to determine the presence of certain pests. How the field may have been scouted would be recorded in question 9. Please note that by scouting a field, you are defining that as a deliberate effort to assess the pest situation in an entire field, not just the edge, center, high, or low areas. Questions 11 through 16 address specific pest management practices and strategies that were used on the selected field for this year's crop. Please be sure to read each question as it is worded and to record 1 for yes and 3 for no for every question on the page. Very important, it is possible that the operator may have used a particular procedure listed on the page, but not for the purpose of controlling pests. For example, an operator may report to you that they use no-till or minimum till in their fields, or that they may be rotating crops in that field. If they are doing those procedures because they would have done them anyway, and they're not using them specifically to control pests, then you should be entering a no with the number 3 in those boxes.